this Oracle Machine Learning Office Hour session. I'm Mark Hornick and joined by Sherry LaMonica, who will be your host for today's session. We welcome our guest speaker, Steve Chamberlin of Sensa Analytics, who will discuss how Sensa Analytics used Oracle Machine Learning with Autonomous Database to address important use cases in healthcare claims processing. Steve has solid experience with Oracle systems over the past 17 years, leveraging the broader Oracle stack, and more recently being recognized with the Oracle Excellence Award for work in the healthcare industry. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve for our session, Plano Orthopedics and Sensa Analytics Apply Machine Learning to Revenue Cycle Management Processing. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me start sharing my screen. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This has been really exciting for us, being able to apply machine learning and just seeing the results that we've been getting already so far for the healthcare industry. What we're doing is we're working with a large orthopedic practice, Plano Orthopedics and Sports Medicine here in Texas, and they've been helping people with orthopedic surgeries, therapy for over 45 years now. They've been growing, they've been expanding their current area as far as the capability to help even more patients. And so looking at trying to be even more efficient and apply automation to their process. We're also based in Texas. We've been doing this for several years now. And as Mark mentioned, we were very honored to receive the Oracle Excellence Award. But we have been noticed by several of the healthcare publications as well for some of the different work that we've done in helping healthcare provide better insight into what's going on. And that's really where this all stems from, which is the capability for being able to understand what's happening. And in a lot of these different cases, what the organizations have happening is they are growing. They have multiple locations and even different types of vendors and systems. And what they need to do is really to put the cliche here is working smarter, not harder. And with that, being able to see what's happening with the claims and the insurance process as it's going through. The main goal is being able to help the board, the physicians, as well as the administrative office have better insight, have a better handle on what's going on, without a lot of work, because what they really want to do is focus on the patients. I mean, the big thing is being able to understand how to provide better care to the patients in a world of ever-changing requirements for the claims, basically getting reimbursed, of course, and that's the name of the game. Just like in any industry, is making sure that you're surviving and succeeding and finding better and better ways to do that. So with that being said, that's one of the biggest challenges that's going on, is being able to stay on top of those claims. The reason why this becomes so challenging is that the insurance companies are changing, of course, the requirements for the different benefits for different procedures on a regular basis. As everybody knows and has been through the health benefits process, there are different types of plans happening all the time. And everybody is not all on a calendar cycle. So there's different changes to insurance classifications, procedures, requirements for submitting these claims. And with that going on, there's also the growth aspect that I was just mentioning. So Plano Orthopedic is a great one. Most of our customers are going through the same thing, which is very healthy growth, which is, of course, a great thing. But as they add new doctors and or add new types of care that they provide, there are new requirements. There's new procedure codes, also called CPT codes. based off of those diagnoses of the patients. And what does that mean? And those requirements can mean anything from having the right signature attached to the claim as it's submitted through to the order of the different procedures that are submitted onto each claim, and being able to then maximize that. So what a good example is of what's happening in that particular standpoint is that you have a surgery. Let's say that somebody needs to have their shoulder repaired, and there could be several different types of procedures that happen at that time. Based off of the order that those are put onto the claim, that can have a major impact on the reimbursement. And the insurance company is not going to try to figure that out for you. That's your responsibility of making sure that you're doing each step of the process appropriately so that those different payments are going to be coming through correctly. The same thing with the diagnosis codes and what they call a modifier. A modifier can just be something as simple as, was this done on the right shoulder versus the left shoulder? Or was it what they call bilateral? So that they did, for example, both knees having an injection. And all of those have different consequences into the billing process. So with all of that being said, you then get down to having all of this information coming from multiple systems. So you have your EMR or your electronic management system or records, as well as your practice management, which is handling a lot of the claim and processing. Then you also have a clearinghouse, and you could have multiple of these depending on locations and what the acquisition process has been. So being able to have a tool like Oracle that brings all of this different type of data into one place is a huge benefit for these different organizations. And for Plano Orthopedic, they have thousands of claims that they're processing every day. What that translates to is between submitting a claim and getting it returned, return meaning that it's fully paid, return meaning that they could have questions, return meaning that a portion was paid and then they're sending it on to secondary. So you have all these different moving pieces that are going on. And that equates to about a claim per minute for each coder on average. So without having an automation process and being able to apply something like machine learning to this, it's almost impossible to stay on top of it all. As I was mentioning, each insurance company has their own procedure or requirements. So a shoulder surgery for one major carrier would have different requirements than another, and what those payouts would be. And those are all negotiated on an annual basis. So that is also going into what's called a fee schedule for being able to understand that, as well as the federal government having different rules for the different procedures and what those require. And so without some of those automation rules and process, that becomes unwieldy. So one of the basics that we're going to talk about today is even something as simple as just being able to go in and say, okay, we saw this patient and there was a mistake made, and both the physician assistant and the doctor submitted a claim for that patient on the same day. So they can't have duplicates. So what do? And so it's going through that process and being able to understand that. And then one of the other more complicated ones that we'll touch on is within a certain number of days, and all of these are different based off of the procedure. It could be 10 days, it could be 180 days, that is bundled into that surgery. So any follow-up visits is not billable. So a company, a healthcare organization can report it, and they do report it, but it has to be coded properly so that it doesn't get denied, cause other issues in the overall process, but that they are documenting the process and just saying, yes, we saw this patient for normal follow-up, and we're not charging for it, but just making sure that we're staying on top of everything appropriately. So anyway, with that being said, what we have going on is all within the Oracle environment and being able to automate this process in a couple different ways. So on the right-hand side, we have all the different, data sources that I was mentioning. So some of the data is the billing data, the claims data. So what is being submitted to the insurance companies? Again, on any given ticket or claim, what are the different procedures? And then what are the diagnosis codes, the ICD-10 codes that support providing or performing that procedure? So that's all being done in that process. And so that's where the EMR and the practice management system, or PM, comes into play. Some of this can be spreadsheets. So some of the data can be from some of the government for the fee schedule. Other parts of it can be just the different codes that they want to follow up and put together. And that's actually something that we do, is also set up and allow the customers to define which codes do they want to track and how do those codes apply to an office visit. So for example, when we were talking about being able to say, here are certain procedures that we want to make sure the modifier is programmed correctly, we're setting those up into configuration tables that support machine learning to be able to go through and apply that effectively to those office visits, so that as a claim comes through, it's actually looking at all of these different pieces of data that go into one claim, even before and after that procedure, to making sure that the end result is going to be handled properly. At the same time, we also have a couple of Apex apps that we've built in the Autonomous database. And so that's actually something good to point out, is that we're using the Autonomous warehouse and database for all of these procedures. And so this is maybe a good point as well. In a lot of these organizations, they don't have a huge IT department, and they certainly don't have data scientists. So being able to have a tool that manages that environment for them is huge, so that they're not having to do all of that maintenance and upgrades, tuning. So that's one less thing to worry about. And obviously that really plays into the whole automation theme. With the scheduling apps, that's also part of what's helping to prioritize all of this data that's coming through, all these claims, for the coders to have priority lists and be able to track what's happening. And in a lot of these cases, there are the configuration tables where they can go in online, if you will, through an Apex app, and then go through and update some of the different configuration lists that also play in not only into the apps and being able to sort the claims, but being able to use that within what we were calling a scrubber for what's happening. So after that gets into the data warehouse that we've put together, that then goes through machine learning and ultimately into Oracle Analytics. So on the machine learning side, what we're doing is, as I was mentioning, taking that data and starting to put that through to understand where have there been issues, or where are there potential issues. And we'll go into some of that decision-making process and just here in a minute. But what we're trying to do is highlight where there is potential for an error so that before these are getting submitted, that we're cleaning those up. So as I was already mentioning, we have some Oracle apps and Sensa apps that are going through and helping to manage that process. And then finally, into the end users. These can be coders, these can be the administrators, the executive team. So for example, at Plano Ortho, the CEO is very hands-on and likes to know what's happening, where are they at on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And he's reporting that to the board on a weekly and monthly basis as well. To be able to summarize that is key so that he is not having to go through and try to figure out those numbers. Just to give you a frame of reference, prior to Oracle and us getting involved, they were using spreadsheets. Not too surprising, where they would copy and or manually count visits, how many visits, how many surgeries did we have happen at the different facilities, and or pulling that information in directly from the scheduling system so that they can actually see what's going on. And then finally off to the physicians, because they want to know how the practice is doing. They want to know how profitable each different type of procedure they're doing. So as the healthcare industry comes up with new medicines, new techniques, some others may not be as just as beneficial to the patient or the organization. And so they're constantly looking for ways to make sure that they're providing the utmost care. That had all been done on worksheets of being able to track how are we doing and looking at that on every 6 months, because that's all they could afford to do because it was so time consuming, so time intensive from a person standpoint that it would take them days to create that information, look at it by each insurance company down to the procedure level. So each individual type of injection, and looking at the costs and reimbursements that are going on. So you can understand if you didn't have an automated tool for being able to make that happen, that's going to be a very, very involved process. So what we're doing is we're pulling that data into one place. So where we have one revenue cycle table, and some of our customers, they actually have 3 different systems that are needing to get pulled into one place and standardized through this process. So each EMR, not only each EMR can have its own definition or IDs for a procedure. So one could have, for example, a code that does match the procedure code. So a 5-digit character. Others have something totally unique. So being able to standardize that information is part of what the process entails. And that's actually part of what the configuration tables that we have set up in Apex to do as well, is being able to convert from one system to another. So with all that being said, we actually have learned through this process that what we needed to do is really simplify. So first we started out with looking at the actual codes that and requirements from each insurance company, what is required for each one of those different procedures. And that made for a very complex process that we were trying to manage and have everybody understand. What we found was that there was a small subset of data that we really needed to be able to get that into machine learning to be able to understand where are their problems, and then how do we resolve those? So that actually took that from, as you can see, down from 28 million rows of data down to a few 100,000. That was much more manageable to say, okay, yes, here's what we need to focus on, at least for this first phase. And this first phase, and this drives directly into what we're doing from our strategy and vision. So this graphic is not only what we're doing today, but it's also a combination of what our overall strategic vision is for using machine learning. So right now, what we're doing is we're pulling in that coding and the billing information, that claims data. We're pulling that in and putting that into machine learning to help look for what is correct or what is incorrect in that process. And that can be some of those items that as simple as, have we duplicated something, to do we have the right order of the modifiers, as well as those global procedure days? How many days has it been since something has been, a patient has had their surgery? And in some of these cases, they were trying their best, but they just didn't have the manpower to always do those. So from there, it goes over to the clearinghouse and then gets processed, and any denials or the reimbursement saying, yep, everything is good, it's paid, that's coming back. And this is going to be our next major phase, which is analyzing those results. And then that is going to be applied to that original scrubber phase. And what I mean by that is, if there is a denial that comes back from something we thought we were cleaning up right in the very beginning, why did that happen? What caused that to occur? Is there a new requirement? Did we just make a mistake? Is that a different type of procedure? Did we have something out of order? And these requirement changes can happen without the insurance company always effectively communicating to the healthcare company that there's been a change. So in a lot of these cases, they'll get a denied claim, and then they'll have to go manually back and look at, why did it get denied? Even contacting the insurance company to understand why that happens. So this is very manual process. And then finally getting to what we're all looking for is those payments. So from that goal perspective of what we're trying to accomplish with this process, and that's probably something I should have cleared up better right from the beginning, is that the healthcare organizations are looking for ways to reduce the errors, of course, but what that means is, and the main goal of that is being able to get paid more quickly. In a lot of these cases, the insurance companies, if you do everything right, you'll be paid within 2 weeks, some longer, but that is the goal, is getting reimbursed and paid for what service that you're providing as quickly as possible, of course. If you make a mistake, that can mean the difference of getting it in that 2 weeks to, it could easily get pushed out to 3 months, because the insurance companies typically will take 30 days to respond back if there's a problem. And then if there is, then again, going back to what I described before, is researching it, trying to figure out what happened, and then reapplying that. With that denial process, with that coming back, that again can mean how much you get reimbursed. So as I was describing before, depending on something as simple as what is the order of those different procedures on a claim, that can, mean the difference of between 4 and actually, I believe it's around 12%, possibly more, of what you're going to get reimbursed, because for a procedure For example, like the shoulder, if you have it out of sequence, it could be a 100% reimbursement for the first step, 50% reimbursement of what the usual fee is for the second, and then 25% for the third. So having those out of order, if one is a $10,000 procedure and the others are $2,000, obviously you want that 10,000 procedure right up front to be able to maximize your reimbursement amount. So as you're going through that process, that's the number 2 goal of using machine learning in this process, is being able to understand what method and approach are we using for being able to make sure that that is maximizing that revenue, that reimbursement amount, so that we're staying as profitable as possible. And again, the insurance companies are not going to do this for you or make recommendations on how to change that. We're trying to help these organizations that have multiple roles to try to catch all of that. But as I was mentioning before, when you have thousands of claims a day and on average, not much time to look through them, you're going to miss a few things. So that goes into how we're applying machine learning and using the notebooks for being able to set this up. So we are pulling the data from the data warehouse. So everything is encapsulated into one place. That's one of the great things, and I'll touch on this again later, of using Oracle, is that the machine learning is right there. It's an option off of one of the consoles of being able to go in and create the machine learning environment and then start setting up how you want to process the data and what data that you're going to be processing. And even to the point of, in some of these cases, what we've been testing is being able to grab documents, put them into object storage, extract the data off of it, and then process it as well. Obviously, that's a lot more complicated, and we're really trying to, again, simplify this process. In this particular example, what I'm sharing here is what we're trying to do is look at those diagnosis codes. So let's see, I think either 6 or 7 sets of diagnosis codes that we're specifically looking at right now to make sure that we are capturing everything correctly, and that it's coded with the right procedure code and the right modifier. So in this particular case, just to simplify it, these are for injections, and being able to say, was it done on a left knee, right knee, or both? And being able to say, if it's both, then it has to be a certain modifier, only one transaction going through. And you can actually see from our results before and after that there are quite often times that's getting duplicated as far as those procedures being sent over, where we're finding those so that they can actually be stripped out and using the right modifier so that it says bilateral instead of 2 transactions that says one is right and one is left. That's a no-no, believe it or not. So when looking through all that, that's looking at those diagnosis codes, but also visit tables, patient visit tables, the insurance tables for the requirements, the different transactions and distribution amounts that are being pulled all together to look at this data. And so then that's where it's going through a couple different methods. One is we're using AutoML to go through and say, okay, what are those different requirements, and using that as a classification and looking through those different transactions to be able to say, okay, here's what's required for this insurance company for this procedure code. I think it's one of the 20,000 series. And what are those different modifiers? and being able to say, okay, are those all aligned correctly? Do we have any duplicates? And if so, that we need to highlight those and strip those out. One thing that's really important here is that right now we're not trying to strip these all out ourselves. So in that particular case, because of healthcare rules and regulations, there's certain things that we can and can't do during this process. So the first part of this is really just being able to highlight what's going on. So instead of us making changes to these records or claims, at least not today, what we're doing is helping to show what needs to be modified so that the coder, instead of trying to figure it out themselves, we have it set up onto a specific page. I think we have a screenshot that I'll show later that highlights exactly which one of those transactions, those visits, are in error, and then being able to go in and find those. And so that's why we're calling these alerts, to be able to say, for this classification for this attribute is what was the error, and highlighting why is there something wrong with it. We're also looking at this being a multi-step process for the end user as well. So instead of only being an error, just saying, hey, there's something wrong, is being able to say what was wrong. And that's where we're at right now, is being able to say and setting flags of why is there an error? What rule is being broken? So that they could actually do more research on it if they need to. So there's claim adjustment codes. Those are actually for the denials coming back. But basically just saying, okay, based off of this rule, here's what has not been followed correctly. In the future, one of the next steps that we're starting to do is to make that prescriptive. And what I mean by prescriptive is not only saying what was wrong, but what should you be doing to fix that? And that's where machine learning is really going to come into play, that we're going to start playing around with next, is being able to say, okay, based off of the history of what's going on, and that's why we're starting to try to pull in as much history as we can to see what are some of these trends. Based off of that code for that insurance company, for that plan, insurance plan, what have we changed so that we can tell them, based off of this type of error, here's the 3 different resolutions to correcting it, and which one is most likely that correct one that you should apply. So again, we're trying to make this process as quick and easy as possible. What we're hoping is down the road, as we get better at this process, as we can work with healthcare organizations and even government organizations, is being able to say that the machine, it's okay for them to make certain changes instead of it always having to be a human. So for example, something as simple as a duplicate transaction, okay, let's just strip that out. Once we get comfortable enough with that and make sure that we're following all the right regulations, is again trying to streamline and automate that process so that it's faster and faster and better as we go through it. So that's where in some of these different rules, and in this particular case, an association is being able to say, here's what we're looking at and some of the different confidence that we want to assign to that. What are the different columns? Of course, the different CPT codes versus ICD-10 codes, the insurance company ID. So looking at all those different factors and saying, okay, what is the likelihood that this is an error? and being able to show that result for the end user off of Oracle Analytics dashboards. So in a lot of these cases, what we're doing is we're taking that information and putting it into something a little bit more user-friendly. So machine learning does have a lot of great visual capabilities, charting. In this particular case, with healthcare, at least what we're experiencing so far, is that there is going to have to be discovery afterwards. So even though we're saying, okay, here's what's wrong, they still want to know what's wrong. Just like any process, you're going to have to work with it regularly over a period of time to start trusting that it's doing the right thing. And what they're wanting to do is not only being able to see what the error is, but then being able to do those lookups, as I was mentioning. And so we've set up several different actions that they can take from those different steps. And so as it's going through those different steps and applying the different confidence ratings, is that then we're looking at those different codes. And in this particular case, these are the different procedure codes that I was mentioning for office visits. So for that office visit, for that diagnosis code, what is that correct? And is that giving the right result? Is it in the right order? So there's pointers on the record to point which of the different diagnosis codes are being used, so that as that claim is actually finally generated and then sent to that clearinghouse that I was talking about earlier, that is all being set up and done in the correct order. So onto those different dashboards, that's what we're trying to look at, is being able to not only provide the warnings, but eventually getting into prescriptive results. And what we've done is, for the priority of them, we actually set up one of the pages that they can maintain themselves. We actually have a couple different ways to do this, is a priority list, really. What they're doing is they have a very senior person, basically Rhonda Lewis, that has been in the healthcare industry for, well, she probably doesn't want me to tell how long, but over 20 years. So she knows all of these rules and regulations really like the back of her hand. She doesn't always have to, rarely does she have to go look something up. So she has been the source of knowledge for how do we need to set these up. She's their compliance officer. So how do we make sure that we're always doing this correctly? She's only one person, and with all that knowledge in her head, how do we get that spread out to other people? So by using Data Visualizer out of Oracle Analytics, not only do we have this checklist, I know this is probably kind of hard to see, but the part that is in blue, those are actually links to the other charts that actually walk them through and say, okay, here's by day, here's by date of service, the patients for each one of the different doctors, because that's actually another rule that I hadn't mentioned, depending on the specialty of the doctor. That's an additional rule that plays into this of, can there be more than one office visit, for example, on a given day? It depends on which doctors that they have seen. So anyway, going into that and being able to drill into those next level of detail, they can now do that with a more junior resource. So it's being able to find that, show them what the issue is in the different tabs within the Data Visualizer notebook. They can actually drill into that detail and pull up pretty much most of the information that they need to understand, is this correct or not? So based off of what we're getting out of machine learning, being able to put that into a prioritized list. Then in some of these, we're actually then being able to share what that confidence is of is it right or is it wrong, and putting it into what we're just calling a rating scale, to be able to say on a rating of 1 to 10, what is the correct confidence of that everything is correct or not, and being able to say, okay, based off of color coding, here's what we need, you should be looking at, to be able to double check and make sure that this is right. And then in some of these different notebooks, and I've kind of grade some of these out, there's different levels of instruction for those junior people on what they need to do. So this has been huge of being able to take it from manually going through this process. And I can't even begin to describe how difficult it is trying to use some of the EMR reports for being able to do this. They literally do not have the flexibility to selectively choose what group of patients, and in some cases, not even the procedures, not very easily, to be able to look at, to be able to find this information. And even when it does spit it out, it's not doing any edits. It's actually just giving you, okay, here's what happened on a given day. So this then in turn means the net result from all this is being a reduced number of coding errors. So they've, on a daily basis, they've been sending out for weeks, months prior to us starting this process, on a daily basis saying, okay, here's what's wrong and that needs to get fixed based off of the time she has, this compliance officer, to look through all this stuff. Now that's suddenly gone away. What would take hours is now literally minutes. It's also automating that process where it could be, as I was describing, a multi-step review to make sure, has it actually been coded right? So we actually have that down in place for them to make that process easier. And so what that means is a better ability to know, forecast really how well they're going to be reimbursed on any of these different areas. So for us, autonomous from Oracle has been nirvana, really, when you are looking at the types and numbers of resources that you have at any given location, any different healthcare organization, both on the technical side and the end user, the super user, if you will. But primarily from the technical side is being able to have the machine learning in one place, so that that's built in with as many different varieties. The reason why I'm chuckling is because there's so many varieties is I think we are actually, to be honest, we're still refining which one of these are going to be the best for getting the best results out of each one of these circumstances. For Plano Orthopedic, what this has meant is definitely speeding up the reimbursement process. However, the other thing that we've also spotted is several things that were in error even prior. So when we were looking historically, doing some of the testing, finding some more opportunity and claims. What that means is that this is already more than paid for itself. I think we calculated out for about every dollar spent on the machine learning program so far, there's been an $18 gain. So of course the organization is being very happy, and I can definitely put anybody in touch with the CEO that is very, very happy with the results. With one of our other customers, with this also, by being able to use Oracle, has been a reduction in that days outstanding. So meaning, on average, how long does it take for them to get fully reimbursed? So as I was mentioning before, it can easily take 90 days if you do something wrong, down to that 2-week process. So that's something that they have been able to do, is greatly reduce the number of days it takes for them to be reimbursed. And then, as I was mentioning before, instead of this being bottlenecked into 1, maybe 2 people of trying to make sure that their claims are in compliance before they're sent out, now they can actually use a relatively junior person that actually walks them through and tells them, here's what looks like it's wrong, why we think it's wrong, and the level of confidence that we have on that as well. So it's been a really very helpful process to be able to get through all of that. So that's where, again, just kind of concluding and wrapping this all up. And I should have put that on another slide here. But as far as next steps for us is continuing to refine our model. Like I said, we've only been really working on this for about 3 months. And then being able to not only give the organization, Plano Orthopedic, that capability for starting to write out prescriptive documentation guidance on what to do with after this, but then now starting to apply these same technologies to what's coming back from the insurance company, the denials. So specifically looking at denials, why are they denied? Is it something that we missed, or is it something new? Being able to categorize all of those issues as well, so that they can also be put into that automated claim tool that I was talking about, that app in Apex. And so we're looking at how we apply that to the automation process for priority lists that are set up for each coder for each day, and being able to understand, okay, what do we really need to focus on to maximize our time spent? And so that's what it comes down to, of course. So with that, Mark, I think I've definitely probably put everybody to sleep, but
Oh, not at all. This has been great, Steve. Thanks for this excellent presentation, and very informative, and clearly an authority on the topic. So definitely appreciate all of this. We do have a few questions
okay,
that have come in, and so let me just, I'll switch to this screen here. Sean asked, his spouse worked in surgery for 33 years, and she often commented that the slow adoption of information technology in the medical profession was very prevalent. So is that still the case, or do you find it's changing?
From what we're seeing so far, that's still the case. Now, let me clarify that, or kind of classify where we're at and who we're working with. So we're working with the SMB, if you will, of healthcare. So that's anywhere from, it's actually, we're working with companies anywhere from about 35 million or so up to 750 million in annual revenues. And so in those particular cases, they're still having the same challenge. A couple reasons why, and this is, I'm again in, I think, a unique place to be able to answer this, because my daughter is a doctor, and she just not too long ago began practicing. And through the process, they're told never to admit that they don't know something. And technology can be overwhelming for anybody, even as, people as smart as doctors, that what they want to do is they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing, but they need to have their own research and support to make that happen. The other reason for some of the adoption issues is just the regulations. There are so many regulations and significant penalties for not following the regulations correctly. People are really afraid for doing something new. So that's why we're going through this so methodically, so step by step, of not trying to do too much right at first, but making sure people are comfortable, that they know exactly what regulations and rules that are getting applied, but then also that they can communicate that easily and document that for any audit purposes. That was actually one of the issues that did come up with one of our customers, is that they were being audited for some of the different MRI, so x-rays, CAT scans, some of those different kinds of things. And it was just a standard review, regional review, but we were able to help them through that process. But again, it can be almost nerve-wracking of just being able to make sure that you're always in compliance. So being able to adopt new technologies is still a slow process in healthcare, but people are seeing the value, and I think it's going to be something that does improve over the years, but I think it will be slower than other industries.
Interesting. Next question from Niraj. Actually, Niraj has a few here. What are the typical transactional level data to which machine learning rules get applied within this case study? And also, are those rules applied together to the transaction data plus historical data combined together in some cases?
Yeah, interesting question. So what we're doing is we're taking this down to the transactional level, meaning that this is the lowest level of data that is used to create the claims. So this is the patient visit information. So this is the transaction that shows when was the date of service, what was done, and you could even drill into the notes. But then also, this is also the low level of data of the diagnosis. So what was, when the physician saw the patient, what did they observe? What are the different symptoms? This could also include results from the MRIs, from a CAT scan, looking at a shoulder. That again actually puts me into a unique position with this, is that I did have my shoulder redone. Well, not redone. So I had a tear in my shoulder. And so I went through this process. So I kind of understand it as well. But anyway, so we're bringing all that into one table that is then put into machine learning. From there, which is part of your question, this is where it really kind of gets interesting, is that for each one of these different sets of rules, there are different steps that pull some, or in some cases, all of that data out to go through and do that performance. So where I was saying we're trying to simplify things, those global period days that I was talking about, as far as how many days has it been since they saw since they had their surgery, that is only being pulled out just for that specific data, so that it actually can go through and look at that to do that comparison, and look at that by different insurance as well. Injections, a different set of data. So since that is needing to look at modifiers, that's a different set that gets pulled from this main source of machine learning data that is then going through its own, basically, notebook. I mean, it really is a notebook that's going through its own process to be able to say, okay, here's what we need to apply for that particular rule, to be able to see what the level of confidence is that we have everything set correctly. Mm-hmm. And so then each one of those data sets is then pulled into its own data model, so that it can actually be put into analytics to visualize what happened and then do that discovery that I was talking about.
So another question from Niraj is the AutoML solution implemented in your current production environment prone to bias and other related errors? How do you verify those types of error conditions, and how can those be rectified and handled effectively to ensure future compliance?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So that's something that we're still working on. What we've done up to this point is looking at, so the way that we're doing this, and I don't know if this is the best way or not, Mark has been a great teacher, and so we're doing a couple different things to be able to try to track this. One is looking at what those end results are out of AutoML, of course, and then being able to see, okay, what's that compliance? As we were doing that process, we were manually going through and using a combination of Oracle Analytics, as well as actually looking at spreadsheets to be able to say, okay, what is the different pieces of data, and being able to say, here's where we know for a fact that there were issues, and being able to compare that to the actual results. As we go through and refine it, we find that we made different mistakes, or we need to change some of the different configuration of AutoML for how we're looking at some of those pieces of data to get the right sets of results based off of potential errors. So that's something that we're still looking at on a regular basis. And I guess mainly what I mean by that is, as we continue adding into this, so we actually meet twice a week with the CEO, even to be able to go through and say, okay, here's what's working, here's where we found errors, here's what we are doing next. And we actually have this broken out into what's in production, what's in unit testing, what's in development, and what's on our strategy plan to be able to keep everything in sync. Then back to your question. So we're using, depending on where that status is, if we're still in development and even in unit testing with the customer, we're doing manual comparisons so that their process can be able to confirm what results we're getting out of ML to make sure everything is working properly.
And I think we have time for one more question, hopefully. Can you give a rough idea of the scale of this effort? How many people were involved in building this out, or how many models, how many transactions per model were involved?
Yeah, really interesting question. So as we were going through this, I'm breaking this into, for the first part of the question, as far as the number of people, breaking this into technical and end user. So on the technical side, basically two people, if you will, 1.5, that would be going through and using ML, putting it together, but then also building out the different dashboards and doing some of those different comparisons on the back end. So that's where, if you will, a data scientist and analytics solution expert play in this process. On the end user side, it just depends on who can play what roles. In a majority of the part, we had that subject matter expert, their compliance person that was going through and working with us daily. But behind the scenes of verifying the data, giving us the feedback, confirming what the results were, that was about 5 different people just doing it part-time. So when you're looking at that whole process, that it does end up touching a lot of different people, so that you are making sure that you're getting what you expect, and they're trying to do their full-time job as well. So this is where it really came into a balancing act of how much could really be done on each week of what they could assimilate, get through, verify and confirm, get turned around, and then on our side, getting those changes made, rerunning results, building new tables, whatever the case may be, for being able to support it.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you very much for your session today. And for everyone else, we will be posting the recording of this in a couple of days. So if anyone missed parts of it, they can go back and check it out. And we look forward to seeing you at our next office hours session. So take care until then.
Thank you.